Thanks very much for that warm welcome, for the introduction. Thanks too to Dr. Agarwal for such a very well-organised conference. It's a pleasure to be here today, especially right now, this afternoon, final session of the conference, and also for many people, probably the final working day of quite a long spell. There's a few ways of looking at that, I think. Yeah, it's the final session, but if this was Glastonbury Music Festival, we would be the headlining slot. So I'm grateful for everybody's continued attention this afternoon. As the introduction very kindly noted, I'm responsible for the UK Intellectual Property Office's work to support bilateral cooperation with India, with China, and specifically to support export and import in those trade relationships. So today, I'm going to be talking less about intellectual property itself and much more about why it matters to companies and why it matters in a much broader sense. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the sorts of things that we do to help businesses in the UK and internationally, and with a specific focus on India. So just to begin with, for those of you that aren't familiar with the organisation, we're primarily a rights-granting national IP office which covers all rights. And very significantly as well, we're responsible for the government's policy on IP. And that's really important this afternoon because what I'm talking about is less IP itself, but more about the incentives that innovators need to help them create new ideas, new ways of doing things, and so help companies and national economies grow. And that's really where I'll linger. No matter which way you look at it, IP matters to both the UK and to India to help economies grow and mature and to help the citizens of both of our countries. As a nation, the total British annual investment in intellectual property rights across all sectors runs at over 4% of our gross domestic product. So we have a particularly knowledge-intensive economy. And my contention is that it's one of the most intangible, intensive economies globally. So to put that into some really clear numbers for you, in 2011, the UK invested almost half as much again on intangible assets, including IP rights, as on tangible assets. That's 127 billion on intangibles compared to 88 billion on tangibles. And that's why it's relevant. Whereas in the not too distant past, the majority of businesses invested in physical, concrete things, like buildings, like machinery. Now, the majority of businesses are investing more in intangible goods like ideas, branding, logos, and the value of creativity. These ideas, properly protected and effectively exploited, help companies compete more successfully in the UK and internationally. Now, the UK has some fantastic strengths in our knowledge base. And we have a fantastic ability to conduct fundamental and applied research across a range of disciplines. But we know that we can't continue doing this alone. Innovation is not a zero-sum game when there are two groups involved. We know that it's only through cross-border collaborations with Indian businesses and universities that our total growth and the benefits will greatly exceed the sum of our individual contributions. The UK's strength as a knowledge-based economy is underpinned by an IP regime that's quite well respected around the world, and it's fundamental to our continuing success of some of the UK's world-class industries. 2 years ago, the Taylor-Wessing Global IP Index judged the UK to be the best place on earth to obtain, exploit, and enforce intellectual property rights. But we're not complacent about that. We're determined to ensure that our intellectual property framework keeps pace with the changing world and remains relevant and flexible to adapt to the new challenges that are faced by us and to keep providing the right incentives to invent and to create. So we're going to keep building on this foundation to ensure that the UK's IP environment reflects the needs of new companies, both at home and overseas. I just want to move on a bit now and give you some specifics on the UK-India trade relationship. When we look at trade, Indian exports to the UK in 2013 were in the region of £6.5 billion. From vehicles to electronic products, many Indian companies have already seen the value of entering the UK market. For those of you who are familiar with London traffic, you'll be familiar with the G-Wiz, the vehicle that's electric, that's small, it's easy to park, and crucially it's emission-free, so the users of the vehicles don't have to pay the congestion charge in London. Earlier this year, the UK Chancellor, George Osborne, visited Mahindra base in the south of India and made the point that Mahindra is already a household name here in India, and it's increasingly well known in the UK. It's going to become more so next year when research and development centres are set up and a new electric car is launched by Mahindra for the UK market. It's also worth focusing on the example of Tata, the largest manufacturing employer in the UK, with 45,000 employees across companies as diverse as Jaguar Land Rover, Tata Steel and Tetley. So I'd go back to my point before that our combined strength can only be continued and improved through this bilateral combined working. From the UK side, the UK invested £2 billion in India last year. That was more than any other G20 country and more than some of them combined. If we aggregate all investment over the last 14 years, the UK still ranks number one amongst G20 countries and accounts for approximately 10% of all investment into India over this period. So the role of intellectual property here cannot be clearer. Great ideas, properly protected and effectively exploited, help companies compete more successfully at home and abroad. Nevertheless, and I recognise that I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but there still needs more and cleverer and harder work. All over the world, we get feedback that companies need help to realise the benefits of the ideas they have, their branding, and their creativity. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about what the IPO does to assist businesses maximise the potential of their assets, their intellectual property assets. We have dedicated business outreach support teams, including our overseas teams that I'll talk about in a moment, who undertake a lot of face-to-face events, and we also have a series of online resources that are available for free, and we work through intermediaries such as trade advisors. If I talk a little bit now about the suite of tools that we have, which you can find quite easily on our website, you'll find that we've got information booklets on IP basics. We've got a free online training course for companies and for advisors. We've got a free and confidential online health check service for companies to assess how well they're protecting their IP. And we've very recently got an IP information smartphone app. So if you're flicking through your phones now, you can take a chance to have a look at that. We also fund 300 IP audits that are carried out by IP attorneys with high growth potential SMEs that are already involved in wider government support schemes. Our long-term strategy, however, is to ensure that the next generation of entrepreneurs and employees understands the importance of intellectual property. So we're doing an awful lot of work across the education sector, in schools and in universities specifically, where students have made it clear that they want to see more IP content in courses. Only 40%, this isn't really particularly impressive in some respects, only 40% of students consider that their current understanding of IP is enough to support them in their future careers. So we're working with university representative bodies and industry to influence the curriculum across the UK. The goal being to see IP included in a much wider range of university courses in universities, so that 40% figure is a whole lot higher, and more people leave formal education with a sense of the value of intellectual property. I was quite pleased to hear last weekend that in the US there's already a range of kindergarten level books to set out innovators as heroes in quite simple stories. So gladly we're attacking the same issue from both the bottom and the top, and hopefully we can share a bit of that and get to a slightly more systematic coverage. If I talk a little bit about what we do in our face-to-face work, we talk to 20,000 businesses face-to-face at over 350 events every year. We get 6,000 unique visitors to our business web pages every month. And each year, about 10,000 businesses use our online tools that I just mentioned. We work with trade partners, banks, accountants, consultancies to integrate IP advice into the wider offer that they provide. So this means that when businesses receive IP advice, they're getting it in a way that's relevant and from people that they're already familiar with. Now, I just want to talk a little bit about the staff that we have overseas that some of you will already have met and already had the chance to work with. We have attachés based in 4 geographic regions in the world. In China, we have 3 people in Beijing. Here in India, we currently have 2 people. And in Southeast Asia, we have an office in Singapore and one in Brazil. The contacts are here. Feel free to jot them down, or I can provide them separately. The purpose of these attachés is to foster closer collaboration with host governments on areas of mutual technical interest, and to provide guidance to companies who are exporting and investing in these markets on how to protect their IP in regimes that may be different from the ones they're familiar with in the UK. And I'll just make one point here as a bit of promotion. You'll see the 2 names, Anshika and Vijay, for India. Anshika Jha is very soon to go off on maternity leave, which is why I'm pleased to announce the appointment of Vijay. For the next week, they're working together, but after next weekend, you'll need to contact Vijay, and please do so. He's a great source of advice. He's worked in a range of sectors relevant to IP, and he'll always be pleased to get feedback from industry and from users. So as I draw towards a close, maybe the final song in this comparison with the headlining set, I just want to talk a little bit about the work that we have done here in India recently and give you a flavour of the sorts of projects that we've done over recent times. Firstly, I'm picking up on this point about the value of cross-border collaboration. We've run a project on the management of IP in Indo-UK R&D collaborations, and essentially provided a toolkit that can be used for free from our website to help in the early stages of negotiation between 2 research partners. That can be university to university or university to business in either geographic direction. It's a toolkit that helps you negotiate what IP you start off with, who owns it, and what is going to be the likely